tournament. The FIFA World Cup in Qatar is due to start on November the 21st. In the United States, President Joe Biden and his wife Jill are with the community mourning the loss of those killed in a school shooting in Texas last week. 19 primary-aged children and 2 of their teachers were murdered by a gunman at Robb Elementary School in the town of Uvalde. It's the third mass shooting in the US in recent weeks. Vice President Kamala Harris says America should have the courage to take action. And Ukraine's President Zelensky has visited troops on the front lines of the northeast of the country today. The visit marks his first official appearance outside of the Kyiv region since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February. Ukraine's military say their forces are continuing to resist Russia's assault in the east. Officials say Severodonetsk, the largest city they still hold in the Donbass, was weathering heavy artillery barrages today. Environmental campaigners have deflated the tyres of 20 4x4 cars in Edinburgh today as part of their campaign to deter people from driving the vehicles in cities. The group's been deflating the tyres of SUVs across the UK, with one member estimating they've targeted around 4,000 cars this year. A spokesperson for Edinburgh Tyre Extinguishers, as they're known, says 4x4s are unnecessary and are massive killer vehicles. But Police Scotland have called their actions reckless and urged drivers to check their tyres before driving. Boris Johnson wants to bring back pounds, ounces, feet and inches. The government is going to launch a consultation on the use of imperial measurements in Britain to coincide with the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. The UK has used metric units since 2000 following an EU directive. Traders are currently legally required to use metric measurements for sale by weight or the measure of fresh produce. And as the UK prepares to celebrate Her Majesty's Jubilee, the Prime Minister says no monarch has served the country so well. In a personal message to the Queen, Boris Johnson thanked her for her exemplary service, praising the institution of the Crown and the exceptional individual who wears it. The Prime Minister also described the Queen as a steadying, guiding force for the nation, adding, Her Majesty embodied the very idea of what a constitutional monarchy should be. And tributes have been pouring in for the legendary jockey Lester Piggott, who's died at the age of 86.
Never Say Die was that 18-year-old marvel of the saddle, Lester Piggott.
The 11-time champion and winner of 30 classics was widely regarded as one of the greatest riders of all time. Fellow jockey Frankie Dettori said Lester was a hero and the impact he made in racing was second to none. Willie Carson, who rode alongside Piggott in the 70s and 80s, said he felt as if he'd lost a part of his life. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, and there'll be more news at the next hour.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking showery at first, although with showers fading away to leave clear spells. Let's take a look at those details. For Devon and Cornwall, a mixture of showers and sunny spells. The showers will still be on the heavy side at first, but will die away through the evening. For London, the evening is looking largely dry with some sunny spells, although the risk of a few showers remains. For Cardiff and South Wales, a few showers are likely this evening, but for many it will be dry with some sunny spells. It's a similar story across Birmingham and the Midlands, where the evening promises to give a scattering of mainly light showers with variable amounts of cloud and some sunny spells. A cloudier picture across parts of north-east England this evening, with a few spots of rain and some bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool along the east coast with wind off the sea. Rather cloudy at times for Edinburgh and southern Scotland, with a few showery outbreaks, but also with bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool, especially towards the east or under thicker cloud. And for Northern Ireland, the evening will see a familiar mix of sunny spells and a few scattered light showers, perhaps a touch breezy along the north coast. A dry night for most away from Scotland, cloudier in the north and turning chilly in the south under clear skies. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Good morning, you're watching and listening to GB News, and this is The Political Correction. I'm Deanna Davison, and today I'm joined in the studio by Paul Embry and by Arlene Foster over in Northern Ireland. We are here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. This is not about journalists talking to journalists, it's about you telling us what you think. Coming up this hour, we are, of course, talking about Partygate after Sue Gray published her report this week into parties that took place in Downing Street during COVID lockdowns. Chancellor Rishi Sunak has announced a £400 discount on all energy bills, part funded by a windfall tax on oil and gas company profits. We discuss what this means for households across the UK. And former Prime Minister Tony Blair is back with hopes of filling a gaping hole left by what he's described as a lack of imagination in British politics. And as ever, here on The Political Correction, we want to hear from you. And with ABBA's epic virtual reunion this week, we're asking which politician would you like to bring back? Tell us by emailing gbviews at GBNews or tweet us at GBNews. This is The Political Correction. Boris Johnson has said the country must move on from Partygate after Sue Gray's much-anticipated report was published this week. The Prime Minister played down his personal involvement in the Downing Street gatherings, but said he took full responsibility. He also said he overwhelmingly believes he should remain in office despite public anger. So, Paul, it's been a pretty turbulent week for the Prime Minister, but what were your thoughts on sort of seeing the aftermath of the reports?
I think they deserve all they get in some respects, Deanna. Politicians who push through these lockdown restrictions, which had such a detrimental impact on people's lives, and they were later found to have, breached the restrictions themselves. So there is a large element of hypocrisy. I'm glad that has been pointed out. But at the same point, I think it's become so tedious, to be honest. I think people across the country are thinking, look, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. I'm struggling to put food on the table. I'm worried about my job. Public services seem to be falling apart at the seams. The pressure on the National Health Service. I can't get an appointment with my GP. I can't get a passport, so on and so forth. And it seems that Westminster and the SW1 bubble and the media have just become completely immersed in this story and completely obsessed with it. And I'm of the view that yes, it's a story, and of course, as I said at the outset, if politicians are being hypocritical in terms of not following the rules while imploring the rest of the country to follow the rules, yes, that needs to be exposed. Yes, they need to be challenged on it, but there comes a point, surely, where you say, OK, the scrutiny has taken place, now there are other priorities. And I think, if anything, what we're seeing at the moment is an illustration of the very serious disconnect that exists between, on the one hand, the media and the political class, and on the other hand, ordinary people. And until the media, I think, and the political class understand that, then I think that polarisation and that disconnect is going to get worse. Mm-hmm.
And Arlene, what about you? Do you agree with Paul that there is that disconnect, particularly on this story?
Yes, I absolutely do. And I think people are really fed up listening about Partygate. I mean, you opened up by saying, of course, we're talking about Partygate. I would love to come on a political correction where we're not talking about Partygate, to be quite honest with you. But unfortunately, there's still more to come because we do have the Privileges Committee looking at whether the Prime Minister intentionally misled Parliament over what he said around Partygate at the beginning. So that has to come yet. And of course, we do have the COVID public inquiry, which we haven't heard about a lot recently, but that has also to be looked into. So this isn't going to go away, unfortunately, but I think people are sick, sore and tired listening to it. In terms of the Sue Gray report, Deanna, I do think probably the most shocking element of it was the fact that cleaners and those people who keep Number 10 running were the ones that were most disrespected, having to clean up vomit after parties, having to deal with things, being the grown-ups actually in the room, saying this shouldn't be going on in the heart of government. And I'm pleased that Sue Gray actually highlighted that, because those are the people, I know this, you know this, that keep government running. The doorkeepers at Stormont, the doorkeepers in Parliament are the people that are the eyes and ears and know what is going on. So I'm glad that she highlighted that. I'm glad that the Prime Minister personally apologised to them about the behaviour that was going on. But again, it should never have happened, of course.
Agreed. And, you know, on the point about the cleaners there, like you, Arlene, I was really pretty shocked and appalled to read that. You know, that there's no excuse for being in any way either abusive or just disrespectful to people who are there to help. And there's no way they should be cleaning up vomit at all in sort of number 10, let alone because of, you know, parties in the heart of lockdown. So obviously there's all this speculation about what happens next, whether the report changes anything. And we've seen a trickle of kind of MPs come out and share their disappointment, a few confirmed that they've put letters in. I think one of the things that I found really interesting over the last few days is the number of journalists who've got in touch with me saying, we've heard there's 30 letters in, we've heard there's 40 letters, do you know how many? And there's so much speculation and kind of brouhaha around this, whereas actually no one knows. The only person who knows is Sir Graham Brady. So it's going to be certainly interesting. But Paul, I guess my take is, you know, we've been waiting for this report for so long. Obviously, the Met Police investigation came along, which delayed it. Do you think the report really changes anything, or do you think it's just given ammunition to Boris's critics who are already critical? And for those who are pro-Boris, they've just said there's nothing in it, nothing to see here?
I think it's very odd, because what was the report actually for? Because nobody has resigned as a result of it. It doesn't seem to have been any kind of substantial, far-reaching change as a result of it. And I was struck by Jonathan Powell, who previously worked for Tony Blair, and he said usually when you commission a report of this kind, it's because you want to investigate something serious, and at the end there will be an outcome. Action will have to take place, whether that is, you know, somebody has to resign as a result of wrongdoing or failings, or even if a report exonerates somebody. You know, like, for example, the Hutton inquiry into the death of Dr. David Kelly, where it pretty much exonerated government ministers. With this, it seems to have had no effect at all. So you have to ask yourself, well, OK, if the report has said that people have clearly been guilty of failings and fell short in their duties, then is there anybody going to resign over it? Are any sanctions going to be handed down? So the whole thing, I think, has been quite weird in that respect. I mean, Arlene touched on, and I think it's right, the Privileges Committee. Of course, if the committee finds that the Prime Minister deliberately misled Parliament, then I think we're back into the ball game of demands for his resignation. I think it would be very difficult for him to escape those.
Yeah, I mean, the Privileges Committee, that's going to be months. It's going to go on probably post the summer. And as you sort of have both rightly said, how much longer can we carry on talking about this now? Do we need some kind of COVID amnesty whereby, you know, whatever's happened throughout the pandemic, you know, obviously we need the COVID inquiry to determine whether government made the right decisions. But Arlene, do we need some kind of amnesty now to stop these sort of historic cases being investigated to allow us to move on to the bigger issues?
Have a de facto amnesty amongst the great general public, but amongst the press pack and SW1, as Paul has rightly said, we're in this bubble of trying to find more and trying to find how can we keep the story going. And I think it really does show the disconnect between what happens in the Westminster Village and what happens in the public. Most people have moved on. They want to deal with the issues that they're facing in their everyday lives, not least the cost of living crisis, which of course we're going to discuss later on. But I do think it's indicative of this sort of press pack at Westminster, the mainstream media talking about it, looking for a new take. And it's all about how can we take the Prime Minister out? Is there another side to the story which will actually make it that he will have to resign? And there is an element of it that is linked to Brexit, I have to say. People who don't like the Prime Minister, don't like the fact that he delivered Brexit, and they want to get rid of him. And there's always different reasons why you want to push a story, and certainly there's an element of that going on in relation to Partygate.
Well, we are going to firmly draw a line under Partygate for today's show. We've got far more interesting and exciting things to talk about, and I think the next one is one that Paul is really going to enjoy. Because RMT union members have this week voted in favour of strike action across Network Rail and 13 train operating companies. Members want a decent pay rise, job security and no compulsory redundancies. That's according to RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch. Department for Transport has said strike should always be the last resort, not the first, adding it is hugely disappointing and premature that the RMT is calling for industrial action before even entering discussions. Go on then, Paul, over to you.
Well, I think we should listen to the RMT. I think the
Shocked to hear you
RMT
say
has proved itself to be right over the years on a number of things, not least the effects of privatisation of the railway system, what that has meant in terms of higher fares, bigger subsidies, a disjointed, unreliable, dirty service. You know, the fact that ticket offices now are often closed, the fact that people are paying through the nose, even with short journeys sometimes now. And the RMT has argued that consistently, I think has been proved right. And I think the RMT is worried now about the undermining of the railway system. It's about the integrity of the railway system, plus, of course, their own members' paying conditions. They're worried about redundancies, the impact that will have on an already kind of creaking service. And also, I think, you know, there's the legitimate point that workers, such as railway workers and others, are being expected during this cost of living crisis to pay the price for decisions which were not their responsibility and for an economic situation that is not their responsibility. I mean, we have had now something like 12 years of a sluggish economy, 12 years of austerity, 12 years of slow growth, 12 years of pretty paltry pay increases. And workers, Deanna, I think, are just fed up. And they're being told again now, you have to tighten your belts. And the things that have occurred in terms of the global financial recession, now the cost of living crisis and what's going on in Ukraine and that impact on it, these are not decisions that workers are responsible for. And I think that when you're in a situation where you're worried about paying the mortgage, where you're worried about putting the food on the table, constantly hearing politicians saying, no, you've just got to accept it, and no, you're not allowed to fight back, no, you're not allowed to withdraw your labour in order to get a better deal for yourself, or if you do, then we're going to try to break your strike action, is not the way to go about it. So listen to the RMT, listen to what I think is a reasonable case, listen to workers right across the country, and accept that there's a case for an increase in wages and better conditions and an economy which doesn't make them pay the price.
But Paul, you talk about workers, obviously, in this case, RMT workers and others working for the train companies. But what about everyone else? What about the people who have to get to work and are going to effectively be held to ransom by the RMT? You must have some sympathy, surely.
Well, it shouldn't be, for me, it shouldn't be a race to the bottom. It shouldn't be about, you know, pitting one group of workers against another group of workers. Now, of course, when people in any organisation, any company, any service withdraw their labour, by definition, there will be a disruption to operations. And of course, you know, you can sympathise with people who are going to be affected by that. But you have to say, look, ultimately, where does responsibility lie? Where does responsibility lie for the fact that workers, for more than a decade now, have had to pay that economic price, as I said, and that workers feel that what's being expected of them is unreasonable, which is to tighten their belts for goodness knows how many more years. We have got a situation, Deanna, where there is very slow growth in the economy, where it's going to be years potentially before people get decent pay increases, where there isn't a plan for real wages to improve, where people are struggling in terms of making ends meet, where living standards have taken a hit, and simply saying to people time and again, oh, if you try and fight back against that or resist it in any way, you're holding the country to ransom and you're being unreasonable. I think that itself is unreasonable. So the government needs to listen to people like the RMT and other unions and other groups of workers who I think have got an absolutely legitimate case.
Arlene, I'm very keen to come to you on this. We've discussed in the past, haven't we, whether unions really are in touch with their membership or whether there's more kind of political reasoning behind their decisions. What do you reckon?
Well, I mean, Paul's talking about workers as if they are not actually part of the economy. The fact is workers are part of the economy and therefore have a role to play in building the economy. And certainly having strikes like the one that is now being proposed will not help the economy to recover. It won't help the economy to grow. In fact, it will set us down in a downward spiral. So I think they're being incredibly short-sighted in terms of trying to make the economy work. And I did note what the Department of Transport had to say in relation to strike action should always be the last resort. The first thing we should do is get around a table and have those discussions. But of course, the fact is the RMT is using this threat of strike action as a sledgehammer. They are trying to force their view into the mainstream instead of actually getting around the table with the employers and trying to work for good. I mean, when I seen the way in which some trade unions working with employers, getting the best for their members, that is the way to move forward, not to set themselves up as the opposition to the employers, but actually to work with the employers to get a better way forward in a realistic way, because of course we are sitting with the after effects of COVID, the fact that we printed so much money to try and deal with the COVID restrictions and with the fact that money was being given out to businesses to help them to exist. And I mean, there was always going to be an issue to deal with after COVID, and we're now having to deal with it, and it is a huge issue. And can I say to Paul, in relation to nationalisation, it's not working particularly well in Scotland, Paul, I have to say, when we see what's happening with ScotRail at this point in time and the fact that they're having to reduce the number of services in Scotland. I think that should be a lesson for everybody.
After the break, we're joined by an energy expert to discuss the Chancellor's announcements this week. Don't go anywhere.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, and the left fights the right, and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was, in fact, a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. This week, Chancellor Rishi Sunak announced that all households will get a minimum of £400 off their energy bills this October, part funded by a temporary targeted levy on gas and oil company profits. Sunak had been urged by opposition parties to help millions across the country by introducing a windfall tax. And Labour Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves said the government had finally come to their senses. So, Arlene, I'm going to start with you here because we're both quite similar in terms of how we view kind of economic management. So what did you make of the Chancellor's measures announced this week? Particularly, where are we finding the money from?
Well, exactly, because, of course, the temporary windfall tax, which everybody else is calling a windfall tax, let's be honest, only brings in, as I understand, around £5 billion. And runs the risk, of course, of disinvestment from the big energy companies. That's what happened back in 2011 when there was a similar tax imposed. And actually what happened was that less tax came in because they decided not to invest. So higher taxes doesn't always mean more money coming into the Treasury. Deanna, you and I both know that. So therein lies a problem. And the rest of the money, as I understand, it's coming from borrowing. And of course, borrowing is not free. It costs a lot of money to the government. And therefore, this is inherently not a very conservative move. It may be quite a popular move in terms of giving money out, as it always is. And we are dealing with, I think, the legacy of COVID, the fact that money was handed out to help us get through COVID and the restrictions and to keep businesses afloat. Now people are expecting government to intervene in this way quite regularly. And therefore, it is very much a Labour sort of announcement. Of course, the Chancellor tried to dress it up as something completely different, but I think it should be called for what it is. It is interventionist, and it will cause problems, I think, for the Conservative Party in the future.
Mm-hmm. So, Paul, Arlene there said this felt a little bit more like a sort of Labour intervention, but this isn't a windfall tax. This is a temporary targeted levy, isn't it?
Well, whatever it is, I think Comrade Sunak has dabbled with a bit of socialism and has found that it's quite popular. So credit where it's due. Bravo, well done him. I think it was absolutely the right intervention. I mean, I have to say, I think the case in favour of the windfall tax was, in the end, incontestable. I mean, the truth is that these oil and gas companies are making extraordinary bumper and unexpected profits at the moment for all of the reasons that we know. And the idea that at the same time, when people really are struggling with their energy bills at the other end of the scale, and we've got a serious cost of living crisis, that it would somehow be unreasonable to go to those big companies and say, actually, we are going to tax you a bit more on your profits so that we can alleviate some of the financial pressures on some of our poorest people. You know, the idea that that is somehow unreasonable or wrong, I think is itself, I think, a wrong argument and unreasonable. So yeah, I think it's the right move at the right time. However, going back to the conversation we were having a few moments ago, I think there's a danger that it just becomes a sticking plaster, actually. You know, the energy price cap, for example, is likely to go up again in October. We're potentially likely to see an increase in bills of around £800 potentially for some people there. So the real task is to make sure that we get growth into the economy and that we find a way of getting real wages up and we get living standards up, we increase productivity, we increase our competitiveness. So we're not having to rely every time there's a bit of a financial crisis on these sorts of taxes, that people have got the high wages and decent living standards to be able to get them through periods like this.
Well, let's talk about energy, because I'm delighted to say we're joined by energy expert and founder of the company Cubes, Joe Gilbert. Hi, Joe. Thank you for joining us on the show this morning. What did you make of the Chancellor's announcements this week? Do you think they go far enough?
I think the Chancellor's clearly listened to concerns for support for those in fuel poverty. We did need targeted support and focus, particularly for the most vulnerable. And, you know, like you've already mentioned, in October, there is another huge increase coming, which will mean over the last 12 months, we've seen energy bills increase by £1,500 just in the last year alone. So I think the measures he's announced are welcomed. However, the underlying problem for millions of households will remain in October, and there will be millions more households that are pushed into that fuel poverty bracket. So he's definitely cushioned the blow slightly, I'd say, but I think the shockwaves of the further increase in October are going to be felt quite wide. You know, they're going to be far-reaching.
Do you think it might call for another set of measures from October, Joe?
What I'd like to see from October is some more targeted measures rather than just keep throwing cash at this issue. As you've already said, it is a bit of a sticking plaster. We need to address the root cause, really. And I think we do need some reassurance that there are some measures and plans coming to actually improve the energy efficiency of homes so that we do see a real reduction in energy consumption. And obviously that will also go towards carbon reduction and net zero targets. So I don't think the answer always is throwing cash at these things, but obviously there are millions of households that are struggling with this cost of living and, definitely the increases in their energy bills. So I'd like to see some longer term measures, particularly on improving, the efficiency of people's homes so you can keep the homes warmer without necessarily having to burn as much energy. And also a social tariff, so it is more targeted, a means-tested social tariff. So we are targeting those that are most in need of this support rather than a blanket £400 support for every household. There are some, households like myself, I didn't need the £400, but there are many others. We saw lots of feedback on the £200 loan that wasn't a loan, and the payback. A lot of households didn't want it. And we're getting the same feedback on this £400 rebate as well.
Mm-hmm. I just want to touch on the point you made there about energy efficiency. There have been a few steps taken, such as, reducing VAT on things that you can buy for your own home to make them more energy efficient. But what practical steps can government take to kind of really help improve this and improve it quickly, particularly for homeowners? Because if you're buying insulation or solar panels, it's quite costly in the short run, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think in terms of funding, so particularly for local authorities, social housing providers, there is low interest funding that can be made available via the industry, and we can there are EPC budgets and targets at the moment where social housing providers are actually being required to actually bring the EPC rating of these properties up to scratch by 2030. And there is budgets that has been spent on EPC for energy efficiency. I think if there was solar and battery storage installed in more homes, then you could actually optimise the use of that battery, and we'd have less reliance then on wholesale markets and these fluctuating price hikes. So there would still be a need to be grid connected for the backup supply, but I think the more that we can bring supply in at local measures, particularly with solar and battery storage, that would be a good move.
Brilliant. Well, Jo, we've had a lot of chats on our show in the past about sort of energy security as well, so we'd love to get you back on in the future to perhaps have a discussion about that. But Jo Gilbert there, founder of Cubes, an energy expert. Thank you for joining us this morning. Now, comedian Ricky Gervais has caused controversy with his latest stand-up show, Supernature, which has been labelled dangerous, anti-gay and anti-trans by a US LGBT rights group. The 60-year-old comedian, regarded as one of Britain's funniest men, said that comedy should be used for getting us over taboo subjects. Here he is trying to explain the way he uses humour.
Welcome to my show. It's not a show. There's no dancers or jugglers. It's basically a bloke talking, which is essentially what stand-up comedy is, isn't it? A bloke talking. Sexist. What about all the funny female comedians? Like, No. Right. No. I'm not doing that. OK, right. That was irony, OK? There's going to be a bit of that throughout the show. See if you can spot it, OK? Now, that's when I say something I don't really mean for comic effect, and you as an audience, you laugh at the wrong thing because you know what the right thing is. It's a way of satirising attitudes. Like that first joke, I used the old-fashioned sexist trope that women aren't funny. Now, in real life, I know there are loads of funny women. Like, I did it again. Well spotted. Good.
There we go, a clip there from Ricky Gervais's show. Well, to talk to us more about whether Ricky Gervais should be cancelled is comedian Leo Kearse. Leo, thank you for joining us. Now, you've had a few run-ins with audiences in the past, haven't you?
Yeah, and with censors and with social justice warriors who've campaigned to try and get me banned and successfully got me banned from like my venue at the Perth Fringe in Australia. But yeah.
But was it that they were frustrated with the things you were saying, or was it just because you weren't funny?
No, well, a lot of times they didn't give me a chance to be funny. That was cancelled before my run started because they'd seen some clip online that they decided was transphobic or whatever, and then got a campaign going and got me pulled.
Mm-hmm. I think it must be such a minefield for you as comedians. I was at a comedy show a few weeks ago, and a guy made a joke about how people will do anything these days for beauty standards. So if the Kardashians got told that going and fighting in Iraq would give them a booty lift, they'd go and do it. And there was a girl in the front row sitting there like this. And he said, "You all right?" She goes, "Joking about war isn't funny." And the whole room just kind of turned. And do you face a lot of that as a comedian these days?
Yeah, I mean, audiences can be weird. A lot of comedians are getting, even like quite right-on comedians are getting. I don't know what it is. Audiences coming out of COVID, they seem more empowered to even get up on stage and grab the mic off people if they think that they're committing some kind of hate crime. But people seem to think that everything should be tailored specifically to them, not to a room of 200 people. So you've seen comedians like Jeff Innocent. So Jeff Innocent jokes about race, but he's in a mixed race relationship. His wife is black, his children are mixed race. So when he jokes about it, he's obviously coming from an informed place, and he's not being nasty. He's not being racist. Like, it just definitely isn't. You wouldn't be able to perform on the London circuit for very long if you came out and you're doing overtly racist, nasty stuff. But yeah, he was somebody got up on stage and tried to wrestle the microphone out of his hand because they were convinced. What it was somebody who was drunk, hadn't been paying attention, heard a few trigger words, and instead of thinking, oh, maybe I should give the comedian the benefit of the doubt, they thought they should take it into their own hands. But that's the culture. I think Twitter and social media has developed this culture where people get outraged straight away. They know they can get attention for being outraged. They're not going to have any negative blowback for being outraged and voicing their outrage. So why not do it in real life?
Yeah, Paul?
Yeah, we often hear the phrase these days in the context of comedy about punching down. Comedians should always seek to punch up and not punch down. And that is actually something that, excuse me, Ricky Gervais has been accused of following this recent show. Was Ricky Gervais punching down there, or was he more punching up towards the elites who peddle the sort of ideology that he was attacking? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've kind of answered your own question there. I mean, progressives do have this sort of hierarchy of oppression with, I think, transgender Muslims are at the top of it and straight white men are at the bottom of it. So, anybody who jokes about anything further up the oppression pyramid is punching down, or punching in that direction. But yeah, he wasn't attacking transgender people, and he's spoken out and said, he supports transgender rights, he supports human rights, which apply to everyone, obviously. And genuine transgender people who put the effort in and transition and look like the gender they're transitioning to, obviously, absolutely, he has no problem with them, using whatever toilet they need to use or whatever. But he's mocking the ideology that says, somebody like me could just say, oh, I'm a woman, and I'm a woman. And that's obviously ridiculous. You can't just say, my pronouns are she and her. That doesn't make me a woman. That's a ridiculous ideology. And this is why comedy is so dangerous to people in power. So the people who have the cultural power at the moment, the woke left, weak ideologies crumble immediately under any scrutiny. And under any mocking. So you see, people in power, the first thing they do, like the Taliban when they came back into power, they killed the comedian who mocked them. And it's the same with the woke progressives. Anybody who mocks them, who exposes the idiocy, comedy's got a power to just expose an obvious truth that you're not allowed to say. So anybody who mocks them, they straight away, they want to wipe that out, like Putin wiping out anybody who mocks him.
It strikes me as well that with a comedian like Ricky Gervais, he can be a bit close to the wire, but he offends everyone. He makes jokes about everyone, regardless of demographics or anything. So is that not equal opportunities comedy?
Yeah, absolutely. He's an equal opportunities offender, as Jerry Sadowitz, another offensive comedian, describes himself. So yeah, it's ridiculous that he mocks all these different types of people and mocks all these ideas throughout the show. But the only one he gets any stick for is when he touches on transgender issues, and he raises some of the issues he's raising, like the sort of undercurrent of violent misogyny. Well, it's more of an overcurrent of violent misogyny in the trans rights. Some elements of the trans rights community. He raises that when he's saying to the woman, he calls her a TERF. You can see the male aggression there, and I think we've seen that with the Emmeline Pankhurst statue, the scenes we saw there with the males in balaclavas intimidating and actually assaulting women. That's something that needs to be brought to the fore and needs to be discussed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think so. And I must say, you talked about the sort of hierarchy of comedy. Try being a Tory. We are always right at the bottom of that list. Leo, thank you so much for joining us. Leo Kearse, comedian there. Now, stay with us, because coming up on The Political Correction, we're talking about the upcoming Jubilee weekend and former Prime Minister Tony Blair, who may be making a return to politics.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
we embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. And as always, loads of you getting in touch with us, especially on the story about the RMT strikes. We've got Darren here. One for you, Paul, says, God help us if Labour get back in, as the left-wing unions will try and take us back to the 70s. Unlike Paul, I remember this well, and the country was a mess.
Well, I'd say I'm not quite sure it was a complete mess. I mean, during the 70s, for example, most families were able to enjoy a reasonable standard of living on the wages of one earner. They were able to afford to buy their own house. We didn't have the astronomical house prices we've got today. So, you know, the 1970s certainly were not perfect, but I don't think they were quite the grim times that many people make them out to be. On energy, Graham says, if this government won't respect the ballot box and democracy, then why should we? Stiff action needs to be taken by the people if the government fails to hold a referendum over net zero and green subsidies, which were never voted for.
Oh, well, loads more views, which we will come to in a little while, but we've got two excellent guests in this section. So let's move on, because for many in the country, this next week will be filled with jubilation as we approach the Jubilee weekend, with 4 days of celebrations to mark 70 years of service from Her Majesty the Queen. But of course, not everyone will be getting in a festive mood, including our next guest, who wants to see the monarchy abolished and the Queen replaced with an elected democratic head of state. He is Graham Smith, and he's the CEO of Republic, who believe that hereditary public office goes against every democratic principle. Graham, thank you for joining us this morning. So I'm guessing you are not so excited about the Jubilee.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, no, of course not. I don't think that it's a good thing to celebrate that one person has been head of state for that long. In a democracy, there should be the opportunity every few years to choose who our head of state is. So that's something which I think we should be looking to do in the future. What I am pleased about is that I'm not in a minority on the lack of interest. I mean, there's polling showing that most people are not particularly interested in it. Only 11% said that they're very interested. Only 14% are organising, making any plans to celebrate the Jubilee. Most people are going to enjoy the long weekend, which hopefully will have wonderful weather like we've got here today. And I think that also there is a significant shifting in attitudes around the monarchy. We've seen over the last few years that support for retaining the monarchy has dropped from 75% to 60%, and support for abolition has jumped up to 27%. So it's over more than 1 in 4 people now want to get rid of it. So there's a fairly significant shift in attitudes and views on monarchy and the Jubilee. And I think that debate has to take off after the Jubilee and as we get towards the succession, because King Charles is not going to be anything like as popular as the Queen.
Arlene, you don't look convinced.
Well, I'm not convinced at all. And I think actually the advertisements on Make Elizabeth the Last are grossly offensive to those of us who see the dedication, the duty, the service that Her Majesty the Queen has given to this nation and indeed the world. And I completely disagree that the monarchy will not continue after Her Majesty the Queen passes away. I think there's a continuity there that is so strong. And I think to suggest that the nation would give the loyalty and really the love that they give to the monarch, that they would give that to an elected head of state is just for the birds, frankly, and it would certainly not happen. And I think that the monarchy is something that transcends us. It is so wonderful to have it here in the United Kingdom, and it will last very much into the future. And it's just so sad to see joy killers that want to make this Jubilee weekend something that it certainly will not be.
Graham, joy killer, is that accurate?
Well, no, that's ridiculous. And people taking offence at other people expressing their views is equally ridiculous. I mean, you know, we do not need to have love and affection for our head of state. It's a job to be done by someone that should be independent of government and should be chosen by the people. Ireland, Iceland, Finland, you know, these countries managed to do this. They elect excellent heads of state who have poll ratings similar to, if not greater than, the Queen, and they do this job having been elected by the people. It's something which we can do very easily, and we can then move on from the monarchy. I would say that for most people, the monarchy is the Queen and the Queen is the monarchy. And I think this is why the message is Make Elizabeth the Last, because Charles does not have the same support. He is easy to criticise without getting people riled up and upset. And, you know, he is not going to sustain the kind of level of support that we've got at the moment. You know, we've seen, as I said, support for the monarchy dropping over the last few years from 75 to 60%, and that's on the Queen's watch. She is by far and away the most popular royal. She is sustaining that level of support. The idea that Charles will turn that around and push it back up again is for the birds, to quote Arlene.
Graham, I'm a fellow Republican, I have to say, but tactically, wouldn't it be wise just for the next few weeks for us to keep our heads down a little bit? Because, I mean, the truth is that millions of people across this country are going to buy into this Jubilee. It's going to be seen by lots of people as a little bit of light relief during, particularly difficult times with the cost of living crisis, etc. And I tend to think that actually, if you're going to advance the cause of republicanism, it's probably best not to really go full throttle on it during a period when the country is pretty upbeat about something that the royal family is doing. Do you not think there's a danger you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot a little bit here?
Well, no. I mean, we ran campaigns during in the run-up to the 2011 wedding for Kate and William. We did so for the last Jubilee and for the last big wedding in 2018, Harry and Meghan. The point is to not allow people to portray the whole country as being hugely excited by these events when that simply isn't the case. And it's not to allow people to be silenced on what is essentially a political issue. It used to be the case that Republicans all sort of said, well, I'm going to go and hide away and essentially cede all this, the whole country to the monarchists. So I think that it's much better to, we're not telling people don't celebrate the Jubilee. If you like the monarchy, you like the Queen, you want to celebrate it, have a great time. But what we're trying to say is that most people are not doing that. And there is a wider political issue to debate whilst everybody is talking about this. And to stress to particularly broadcasters, make sure that you are reflecting the breadth of and diversity of opinion and not suggesting, as is often the case, that everybody is joining in, because they aren't. So I think what we're saying is that whilst this is on the news, whilst this is being talked about, that's the time to think about the Constitution, about the future. And by the way, we are not a country that is gearing up to celebrate en masse. It is a minority interest. Absolutely fine for that minority to be excited by it. But, there is a wider, more serious constitutional issue to discuss.
Well, Graham Smith there, CEO of Republic, joining us to talk about the monarchy. Graham, thank you for your time today. I don't know how I feel about that as a minority interest, though. I mean, there's communities all over the country celebrating the Jubilee in every single corner. But let us know, do you think that the monarchy should continue? Will you be celebrating the Jubilee weekend? Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, this summer, former Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair will host a Future of Britain conference in a bid to, in his words, fill a gaping hole left by a lack of imagination in British politics. It's being reported the lineup may include French President Emmanuel Macron, and speculation is rife as to whether Blair is returning to a life in politics. In an interview back in March, he said he wanted to advise the next Labour government. Well, joining us now to discuss this story further is former political advisor to Tony Blair, John McTernan. John, tell us a bit about this conference.
Well, it's a continuation of the work of the Tony Blair Institute, which ever since Tony set it up, he's been developing policy for any centre-left, any progressive party in the world to use. He's got this international network. He's thinking about issues all the time. He's never really left politics. I mean, just look at the way he assisted the government in the rollout of the vaccine program. It was Tony that came up with the idea of separating the doses so we could get twice the number of people covered. And he's just been relentlessly focusing on why can't we be answering the big questions facing the country in the 21st century? Whether it's about AI or whether it's about climate change, there are massive debates that we need to be seeing our politicians focused on. And this conference, we're bringing together great progressive voices, successful progressive voices, one who win elections, into one place so we can learn from each other. So it's an amazing opportunity for anybody who wants to see reform and transformation in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
John, the problem is that, yes, he did win elections, but he won elections, and I say this as a long-standing activist in the Labour movement who was very glad to see Labour win elections, but he did so in a very different world to the one we're living in today. And the truth is, this conference seems to me just about reinforcing that kind of hyper-progressive, centrist, liberal agenda that actually has done so much in Britain and beyond to alienate ordinary working class blue collar voters. It gave us Brexit in part, it gave us a 2019 general election in part. Labour has become a much more metropolitan kind of middle class party since. Why do we want to go back to those days? That's not how we're going to rescue the Labour Party, is it?
This conference is about the future. I know that Tony would not run a new Labour programme today. What he would do is the same thing that he and Gordon Brown and Peter Mandelson did in the mid-90s, which is look at where we are, look at where the party is, look at where the country is, look at where the voters are, and look at the challenges facing the country. The great thing about 1997 was there was a massive program sitting behind the slogans that we had. It wasn't just for the many, not the few. We knew how to actually deliver for the many and not just the few. And it wasn't just, leadership, not drift. It was demonstrating leadership in ideas, in program, in ambition. And that's the point. The point is you need a new program for 2022. It's the 21st century. Of course, we don't need to, in 1997, Labour had to get rid of outside toilets in primary schools. That is the state of the country we inherited. It's hard to imagine that now, harder even to remember that's actually true. And this is now about what is the next agenda. That's why you're bringing in Macron. Half of the population of the European Union live under centre-left or centrist governments. America has got Biden, Canada's got Trudeau, Australia has got Albo, New Zealand's got Jacinda. There's a lot to learn from the turn across the world to centrist progressive ideas. We need that here. We need transformation in our government now.
Well, John, thank you for your time. I'm sure we could carry on this discussion, but that's all we've got time for now.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking showery at first, although with showers fading away to leave clear spells. Let's take a look at those details. For Devon and Cornwall, a mixture of showers and sunny spells. The showers will still be on the heavy side at first, but will die away through the evening. For London, the evening is looking largely dry with some sunny spells, although the risk of a few showers remains. For Cardiff and South Wales, a few showers are likely this evening, but for many it will be dry with some sunny spells. It's a similar story across Birmingham and the Midlands, where the evening promises to give a scattering of mainly light showers with variable amounts of cloud and some sunny spells. A cloudier picture across parts of north-east England this evening, with a few spots of rain and some bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool along the east coast with wind off the sea. Rather cloudy at times for Edinburgh and southern Scotland, with a few showery outbreaks, but also with bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool, especially towards the east or under thicker cloud. And for Northern Ireland, the evening will see a familiar mix of sunny spells and a few scattered light showers, perhaps a touch breezy along the north coast. A dry night for most away from Scotland, cloudier in the north and turning chilly in the south under clear skies. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left